Hi, this is Stephanie, and the name of my channel is This Reader's Life. It's subtitled Books and Other Blessings. Today we will be talking about books for the most part, although Thanksgiving obviously is over, and that's such a wonderful time to realize all the blessings that we really do have. My Thanksgiving was actually two Thanksgivings. We had one with my family on Thursday at my sister's house, and the other one was with my husband's family in it was in Missouri, and it was at his niece's house, and both of them were lovely. My favorite thing about Thanksgiving, well, I love all of the blessings we receive, of course, and all of the family time that we have, but my favorite food is always the dressing. I like the stuffing or the dressing, whichever you want to call it. I'm curious to know, because I've done it for years. I cook my dressing in the turkey, so to me it's technically stuffing. Some people do and some people don't. I know there's controversy about it. I haven't killed anybody yet. Well, I've been doing it for more than 40 years, so I don't intend to stop. But this year I didn't cook any turkey. I just did some different types of side dishes for both of the gatherings. But I have been reading, and as far as books go, I finally finished, and I've talked about it in a couple of videos now, The Honeycomb by Adela Rogers St. John's. And after I read that, I liked that book a great deal. I've thought a lot about that book, and I could spend probably an entire episode talking just about that. But I did also think about another memoir that I listened. No, I did listen to it. It's been several years ago, and it was by Joyce Maynard, who wrote At Home in This World, or At Home in the World. And it was in regard to her early career as a journalist, as well as a relationship that she had in her early years. So I'll talk about both of those. I think the comparison between the two is very interesting. The Honeycomb, Adela Rogers St. John was born at the end of the 19th century. So she was born in 1894, and by the time she was 18, which was not 1911, 1912, we were just barely into the 20th century, she was a reporter for, I believe she started with the San Francisco newspaper run by William Randolph Hearst. She moved on to Los Angeles. She worked for different papers, but I pretty much always William Randolph Hearst, except for a short period of time, I think, that she wrote for Photoplay, which is also very interesting. Photoplay was a movie magazine. She started early in her career writing screenplays for silent movies, so she had close relationships and friendly relationships with Mary Pickford and the Barrymore actors and actresses, as well as Lon Chaney, Rudolph Valentino. Some of the biggest names of that time were in some of the movies that she wrote the screenplays for. Along with that, she also covered a lot of really exciting and important stories that normally women would not have even been allowed into the press box or anything like that. One of them would have been a Joe Dempsey fight when she was allowed into the box, and one of the fighters ended up landing on her or falling on her, something to that effect. She was not super welcome as a woman in that respect, but she did cover some things like that. She also covered some of my favorite things that she wrote about was covering the Lindbergh kidnapping. And Anne Morrow Lindbergh and her husband Charles Lindbergh had a child. It was a very young child that was kidnapped out of their home while they were there in their home. The nurse discovered that the child was missing, and an arrest was eventually made. And when it all went to trial, Adela Rogers St. John's was able to cover it. And she talks about it a little bit in that, number one, she felt so sorry for this family. She could not imagine. She was so impressed with Anne Morrow Lindbergh's ability to recover from that and go on to write some books, and to her faith brought her through a lot of the difficult times. She never really spoke about it in great detail again, and Adela Rogers St. John's admired that. She also covered during the Depression. William Randolph Hearst sent her out as a penniless woman. Well, she had a dime. They gave her a dime to put in her pocket so that she would be. There was the brother, can you spare a dime type of idea, and there was a problem for women during the Depression era after 1929, after the crash. There was a problem for women as well as men, but single women found it very difficult to find jobs. And so she went out on the streets, slept on the streets quite frequently, sometimes was able to find a place to sleep. She talks about how many of the women resorted to a lifestyle that she would never have had to resort to, and of course she didn't. But she did eventually find a job as a mother's helper, which made her think more and more about her own children. She thought about her own children as far as the fact that she was out working and that she was not with them, and that bothered her a great deal. She had a strong sense of home and family. She felt that that she didn't always feel she was being true to her family, and that she was conflicted quite a little bit by that. And that's one of the interesting stories that she also was involved in, is that she was involved in a debate with a woman in California who was the president of women's clubs or ladies clubs, and the whole debate was, is the beginning or the impact of the modern woman. Is it a failure, or is it that particular movement, or is it a success? And being a working woman who went outside the home to work, Adela Rogers St. John's was asked to debate this women's club president regarding it, and I believe it was a large audience, and she, during that time, I think what she wrote or what she said was very interesting. She recounted it in her book, and this would have been in 1929, so right around the time that the Depression was beginning, and women were starting to step outside of the home to help supplement incomes or to just supplement themselves. And this is what she wrote, and I think it's such an interesting juxtaposition of who she was and what she thought. Your first duty is your children, your home, your husband, and the sanity of your family. No nation can continue half slave and half free. I agree. Nor can it continue if the slave who has been emancipated only uses that freedom to get a little more dough to buy herself silk stockings, or to gather success for herself, or to roll in the same gutter with men. Throughout history, throughout all civilization, a nation has been as strong and as sound and as happy as the family. The family is the foundation of what happiness we seek, the safety we long for, the love and faith we have cherished. The first unit. The man is the head of the house, but the foundation of family is the character and joy of the mother. And I thought, number one, I think it's a very beautiful way to think, and I also think that it is unusual, kind of interesting that she was conflicted in lots of ways, spiritually, as far as her work, as far as her marriages. She struggled a great deal with that, and she certainly realized that she was privileged to be covering the types of reporting that she was able to do. When the Lindbergh verdict broke and they found the kidnapper guilty, she more or less broke that story. She had someone inside of the courtroom who was able to let her know what the verdict was, and she made her way out of the courtroom as quickly as she could, although the press had been sequestered as well, and she made her way out of the courtroom and was able to break that story before anyone else, which is really sort of a big deal. And maybe it was easier for her because she was a woman. She wouldn't have been as suspect as probably as the others might have been, who might have been trying to get out of the room. She also covered when King Edward VIII abdicated the throne in order to marry Wallis Simpson, who was an American divorced woman, and that was highly unacceptable at the time. Um, and it was interesting to me that Adela Rogers St. John's, when she covered that, she didn't find herself overly sympathetic to Wallis Simpson, and I thought that was interesting. She thought she was cold, and she didn't care for her. But anyway, Adler, there were so many other things that she writes about and talks about, and her story was so well written. It left me feeling uplifted and hopeful, and I admired her so much. I actually looked her up to see if I could find her on YouTube, and there are lots of old movies that she did, or that she wrote. But there's also a Johnny Carson interview. For those of you that remember Johnny Carson, he did the Tonight Show several years ago. My mom used to watch him a lot. He was on every night after the news at 10:30, and he interviewed her, and it was a very, very interesting interview. She was at that point just a little bit older, and her outlook was really, really interesting. So that was The Honeycomb, and I won't go on about it anymore, and I promise not to talk about it anymore, but I did truly, truly enjoy that book. I would give it 5 stars, and I will go back and reread parts of that book over and over again just for the inspiration. Now, the Joyce Maynard novel that she wrote was called At Home in the World, and Maynard was born in 1953, so she was much more contemporary, obviously. And she published this particular memoir in 1998. I believe that she's written a few others, but this one is fairly specific to her upbringing, as well as to her early writing and journalism that she did. When she was 18, she was at Yale, and she wrote a piece that was published in the New York Times Magazine, and so that would have been in about 1972. So she was 18 at that time when her journalistic career began. And the name of what she wrote was An 18-Year-Old Looks Back on Life, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about, because there's not too much to look back on at that point. But because of that being published, she received quite many letters, obviously, and she received one from J.D. Salinger, the author who wrote The Catcher in the Rye and some other books, 9 Stories, I think, and Franny and Zoe. And he contacted her, and they started a what became sort of a passionate correspondence between them. They wrote back and forth, and then eventually she met him, and eventually at 53, he was a divorced man with children. He was quite a bit of a recluse, and he invited her to live with him, which she did. She considered, I think at the time, she truly thought she was in love. It makes me think a little bit of women of that age, or that who are approached by men who have power or who they admire, maybe like a Monica Lewinsky, for those of you that might remember that. But at any rate, she did move in with him. They did have a relationship. The way that she explained it is that it was never consummated due to his inability to consummate it, but that there was definitely a sexual relationship. He was very controlling. She portrays him as a bit of a narcissistic weirdo. When you get right down to it, he was very odd, according to her. Of course, it's a one-sided story, and Salinger never rebutted anything. He never responded to it in any way. She published the book in 1998, which was quite a long time after the actual affair or relationship had happened. And the relationship was ended by Salinger in a cruel, truly mean, downright mean way. And she was a bit broken by it, I think. And I'm not sure why she chose to publish that when she did, or why. Salinger was still living. There was a lot of controversy about it, and I find it really, really interesting that she did it at all. I'm not sure what her motivation was. I know that she later she auctioned off his letters that he had written to her. So she auctioned off those letters, And I know they sold in excess of $150,000, and the gentleman who bought them returned them to J.D. Salinger, which is rather interesting. But I found myself, it was harder for me to feel sympathy for Joyce Maynard in the same way that I felt sympathy for Adela Rogers St. John's. And there were big similarities for the two, but they both had sort of an unusual upbringing. They started their careers quite young. They both were at a time when women were sort of asserting themselves in a different way than they had in the past. I found Adela Rogers St. John's likable. She was spirited. She wasn't self-serving. She didn't whine. And I felt almost exactly the opposite reading Joyce Maynard's story. Now, when I read it, I was a little older. Had I read it when I was 20, I might have felt a little differently about it. But between the two books, I felt like I liked Adela Rogers St. John's The Honeycomb much, much more. I would give it a 5. Joyce Maynard, I enjoy her writing. I've read other novels of hers, but this particular memoir, I would give it maybe a 3, and I probably would not reread it, but it is an interesting read. So there's that, and yeah, y'all can decide for yourselves, but I thought both of those were very, very interesting books, and they rounded out my nonfiction November really, really well. And then the other thing that I want to talk about, this one I was so excited. I found it last time on my last video, I asked for help finding a book called In a High Place, and I did not know. I thought it was In a High Place or From a High Place, and I've since discovered it was In a High Place. A friend of mine who watched my video, she found it and sent me a private message letting me know what it was. But it was In a High Place. It was published in 1982. It was written by Joanne Meschery, or Meschery, Meschery is how that's read. And she's published a couple of other books since then. I was able to do that research. But I enjoyed that book very much the first time I read it, and I intend to read it again. I also intend to see if I can find a way to contact her. I believe she'd be close to 80 at this point, or in her late 70s. But I would like to write to her and just let her know that it was something that stayed in my mind for a long time. I believe she went on to become an instructor, a professor at a couple of different universities, I think. But it was just really exciting to me to do the research, and I thought about that the internet, which is not necessarily my favorite thing, and Google and all the ways that you can do your research, I always tend to want to go find my old World Book encyclopedia when I have to look something up, which is sort of silly, but that was such a joy for me as a child when I was able to do that. But anyway, I would like to write to her, and there's kind of a story behind that too, but I'm going to leave it for next time. So until next time, you know the drill. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and be kind to the planet. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.